Unlike the advice of Sebastian in The Little Mermaid, wetter isn't always better. At least that's the case when it comes to reverb. So today we're going to talk about the 4 parameters you need to know to get started using reverb. What's going on, VoiceOver warriors and keyboard ninjas? This is the Oreo Monster welcoming you back to Logic.band. It's a website full of tips, tricks, and tutorials for blind Logic, VoiceOver, macOS, and GarageBand users. If you haven't yet, type Logic.band into your web browser, hit return, and when you land on the page, go ahead and sign up for the mailing list so you can get a free Getting Started with Logic course. So Logic has not one, but at least 2 flagship reverb plugins. That is Space Designer and ChromaVerb. Now, Space Designer is what we consider a convolution reverb, and that means it's made up of impulse responses or IR files, and those are wave files that someone took a snapshot of a space, a room, chamber, etc., and used that to generate the reverb. ChromaVerb, on the other hand, is what's considered an algorithmic reverb, and that means someone wrote code and algorithms to emulate the different sounds of different types of spaces. Both Space Designer and ChromaVerb include at least 4 different types of reverbs: rooms, hall, chambers, and plates. There is also spring reverb, and those are more commonly found in guitar amps, and Space Designer do also have some spring reverb presets as well. So let's start with plates. Plate reverbs are a man-made mechanical device which has a metal plate suspended within it. Audio was played back through transducers to vibrate the metal plate. You can think of transducers as the things that make up speakers. And the vibrations were then recorded with pickups or contact mics on those metal plates and blended back in with the dry signal on the recording console. Hold a metal object like a pan up to your ear and tap on it, and you'll get a basic idea of what a plate reverb is doing. Now, the other 3 types, rooms, halls, and chambers, are all based on a room of some kind. Room, as the name implies, tries to replicate the sound of an actual room. These can be small room, medium rooms, large rooms, etc., and the preset will usually denote what type of room it is. Now, halls, on the other hand, is where you start to get into much bigger spaces. Think of a concert hall, a church. Halls usually are trying to emulate spaces like these. Chambers, on the other hand, these date back to the 50s and 60s, again similar to plate reverbs, but these were actually rooms. There were usually a room in a studio, in the basement, or in a closet, or sometimes even a restroom, that just had a really nice natural reverb to it. And what they would do is they set a speaker up in that room, and then they set up a microphone similar to what they'd used to record vocals or drums or guitars. They'd play the source that they wanted to put in reverb through that speaker, and then they'd record the sound of that room through the microphone and blend it in with the dry signal, again similar to what they did with a plate. So those are the 4 different types of reverbs we're going to take a look at: plates, rooms, halls, and chambers. Alright, let's go ahead and jump into Logic, and we're going to start with ChromaVerb. Alright, so we have ChromaVerb pulled up here in Logic, and right now I have this directly on the vocal track. So there are 2 ways you can use reverbs. You can instantiate them directly on the track, and you'll have to use the mix within the plugin to get the right blend, or you can instantiate them on a bus or aux track, and you can use the send level of the aux track to get the right blend. If you're not familiar with aux tracks and buses, there's a module in the free Getting Started with Logic course that covers setting up a bus or aux track in Logic. If you have not yet, you can visit Logic.band and sign up for the mailing list there to receive the free Getting Started with Logic course. Alright, so right now, as I said, I have ChromaVerb here on the vocal track, and I'm just going to navigate over to where the parameters are. So as I VO right,
vocals, toolbar button, bypass unchecked, factory default, pop-up button.
You see this factory default pop-up button, and this is, as always with all Logic plugins, where if there are any presets, they're going to show up under this menu. So if I VO space here,
menu, setting, undo, redo, include, next, previous, copy, paste, load a list, save as a list, save a copy, save as default, recall default, delete, dimmed, ambiances, submenu. As
I VO down arrow, you see there's ambiances,
chambers, submenu,
chambers,
FX, submenu,
FX. So these are different submenus, and if you VO right into any of these,
FX, submenu, 4 items K.
You see there are different presets here you can start with.
Spherical, weird space.
So you can always go through presets and find a preset to start with. I'm going to press escape here.
Closing menu.
And let's continue over to the parameters.
Preview, next, compare, view, link, uncheck, table, dry, 100% slider.
All right, so this is a table with all the parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and interact with this table.
In table, dry, 100% slider.
And the first parameter that we come up on here is dry. And if I VO down arrow,
wet, 50% slider, 50% slider.
Is wet. So we have dry and wet. So some plugins just have a mix knob that sets the blend between the dry signal and the wet signal. As you go over 50% towards 100%, you're going to be hearing the affected signal. And as you go below 50% towards 0%, you're going to be hearing more and more of the dry signal. So ChromaVerb and Space Designer, however, have a separate control for the dry signal and the wet signal. So you can adjust the levels of them independent of each other. Now, by default, you do have your dry signal at 100%, and that's what I'd recommend doing, because that basically means the dry is going to remain at the same level as when it's bypassed. And then you can use the wet level to blend in how much of the reverb you want. So right now, the wet is set to 50%. I'm going to interact with this.
50% slider.
And if I play this,
can we forget about the...
You see there's a lot of reverb there. If I
40%, 30%,
take
20%.
this down to say 20%.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
You see that starts to get a lot subtler. If
10%.
I go down to 10.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
That gets really subtle. Let's go back up to 50 so that it's very apparent when we're making some changes here.
20, 30, 40, 50%.
All right, so there we are.
Can we forget about the...
All right, so let's get
Auto
out
slider.
of the wet level.
Room type, room pop-up button.
The next thing we're going to look at here is the different types of reverb that ChromaVerb does. So you have different types of room. Right now we're on a room, and I'll play this again for you.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
All right, so now if I VO space on this, is a pop-up button.
Menu, 14 items, check chamber.
We have chamber.
Dry, 100% slider, 100% slider.
And remember, I said chamber is one of those where they set up a speaker, usually in a relatively small room, but it was really reflective, and then they'd use a microphone to record that sound back in.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
All right, so that's the chamber.
Dry, 100, wet, 50%, room type, chamber pop-up button.
So now let's check out the hall.
Menu, 14, concert hall.
Let's go with the concert hall.
Dry, 100% slider.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
So you see that one is a little bit more reflective almost. You can kind of hear that there versus say something like the room. And I'm gonna...
Wet, room type, concert hall pop-up button. Menu, 14 items check mark, concert hall.
You see there are 14 options here.
Theater. Synth hall.
Got a theater, synth hall, digital,
Dark room.
dark room. So that room's not gonna be as bright.
Dense room.
This room is gonna sound like there's more stuff in it as opposed to like an empty room.
Smooth space.
Smooth space. So there's a
Vocal
bunch
hall.
of interesting different reverbs here.
Reflective hall. Strange room. Airy. Bloomy. Bloomy.
I imagine Airy's probably going to be brighter. A lot of interesting options here in ChromaVerb, so I definitely encourage you to go through and mess with some of these different types.
Closing menu. Room type. Concert hall pop-up button.
I'm going to leave it on concert hall for now. By the way, whenever you VO space on this menu to change a sound, it does jump you back to the top of the window and put you back on the dry parameter. So you will have to VO down or back to the room type pop-up button to choose another one. All right, so moving right along.
Pre-delay. 8 millisecond slider.
We have pre-delay. Pre-delay allows us to put a little bit of a delay before the reverb. This basically means that you'll hear the start of the word or the initial transient of the sound before you hear the reverb kick in. So right now it's only at an 8 millisecond pre-delay, so it's probably not the most noticeable thing.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
All right, so now I'm going to turn this up a bit.
In. 8 milliseconds. Slider.
So it's at 8 milliseconds. Let's go ahead
slider.
and crank this
8,
up.
20, 30, 50, 60, 78, 8, 9, 118 milliseconds. 100, 358, 300, 468 milliseconds.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
So right there, you should definitely be able to hear that the words are clearly starting before the reverb kicks in. Whereas if I take this down to 0, now there's never a point where the reverb isn't going to be there.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
So now you have reverb on it from the very beginning. So it could be vocals, it could be something as short as a snare. You generally want to have a little bit of a pre-delay to give you some clarity around your sound. So if I turn this up
10,
to
20,
say
40 milliseconds.
40 milliseconds.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
You see, that's almost like just enough of a hint to let the start of the words come out so you get some clarity, but the reverb is still very much there. All right, so now...
Auto slider. Pre-delay sync. Uncheck checkbox.
Now, the cool thing about the Logic reverbs is that they have this pre-delay thing, and this allows you to sync the pre-delay time to the tempo, similar to how you'd use a delay plugin. This is something that I don't see on a lot of reverbs, even paid reverb plugins, and I find that it really does help with whatever you put in the reverb on, just blend into the mix and not be noticeable. And it's a little bit easier, I feel, to set the pre-delay with the pre-delay sync set to match the tempo instead of doing it in milliseconds. Let me go ahead and turn this on.
Dry, 100% slider.
And turning on the pre-delay sync, unfortunately, it takes me back to the top, so I'm just going to VO down arrow.
Wet, room type, pre-delay, 1/32 slider, 31.5% slider.
All right, so now it's giving me musical time instead of milliseconds. So now that you can see that 40 milliseconds that I had the pre-delay on is about 1/32 note with this tempo. And now
In, 1/32 slider.
if I interact with this and adjust it, you'll see that it moves in musical time.
1/32, 1/32, 1/16T,
That's a 16th note triplet, 1/16T.
1/16T, 1/16T, 1/32D,
132D, that's a dotted 32nd note.
1/32D, 1/32D, 1/16.
And then that's a 16th note, so
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
you can now adjust your pre-delay time in musical time that is locked to your project's tempo instead of milliseconds. All right, so
Out of slider.
let's move on to the
Pre-delay
next
decay time,
parameter,
1.10s slider.
and that's decay time. If pre-delay is when the reverb starts, you can think of decay as when the reverb ends. So decay is going to be how long it takes for that reverb to fade out. Right now we have this set
In,
to
1.10s slider.
1.10 seconds. So if I play this again,
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
now if I
In slider.
take this down
0.
to 0, you'll see this reverb is really short now because there's no decay time to it. It's 0 seconds.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
See, it's like the reverb just disappears immediately.
0,
Crank
0,
this up.
0.55s, 0, 0, 0, 0.97s, 1.10s, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12, 8, 29.00s.
So 29 seconds.
Can we forget about the things I said?
You see the reverb just echoing into itself there, and it starts to oscillate when you set it that long. So for really slow ballads, you can probably get away with a setting like this.
4.70s.
You can probably get away with like maybe 3 or 4 seconds.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
But for a faster song,
3, 2, 1, 1.30s, 1, 0, 0.85, 0.65s.
you might want to keep it shorter.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
All right, so much like the pre-delay,
Out of slider. Out of. Decay time sync. Uncheck checkbox.
the decay time can also be set to match the project tempo.
Dry, 100% slider.
And much like the pre-delay, annoyingly, it kicks you back to the top of the window when you enable it. So let's VO down arrow.
Wet, room top, pre-delay sync. Decay time, 1/2 slider, 26% slider.
So now you see that our decay time is set to a half note, 1/2.
In, 1/2,
So if
slider.
we want to make this a little
In slider.
shorter, interact.
1/4D, 1/2T,
That's a quarter note dotted, half note triplet,
1/4.
and then a quarter note.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
So you can adjust this in musical time, or you can turn off decay time sync and adjust it in milliseconds. Like I said with the pre-delay, I find having them sync to the project tempo really does help the reverb blend in with your track much better than trying to do it in milliseconds. All right, the next parameters we're going to look at here is going to be your filters, your low cut and high cut filters. And these really do help clean up some of the high end sizzle and some of the low end rumble and mud in the reverb to make the reverb more clear. So I'm just going to VO down arrow through the rest of the parameters in here, and we'll go ahead and look at the low cut and high cut EQ filters.
Attack, size, density, early, width, mono, freeze, quality, modulate, empty set, damping low, damping low, damping high, empty cell, output EQ on/off, checkbox.
All right, so we want to make sure this output EQ is on, so EQ is on, check.
Low cut on/off, uncheck checkbox.
We have the low cut, that's not on, so I'm going to VO space on this to turn that on.
Checked. Low cut frec, 20.0 Hz slider, 0% slider.
And the low cut frequency is at 20 hertz. 20 hertz is about as low as the EQ goes, that's about as low as we can generally hear. So right now it's not really doing anything.
20.0 Hertz. Slider.
What I'm going to do is interact with this and adjust this up to something more noticeable. So I'm going to go ahead and play this and then start adjusting it.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was
85.98, 112 Hertz.
Can we forget
100,
about
100,
the
200
things I
hertz.
said when I was drunk?
And you probably heard that low end got a lot cleaner and clearer as I got up to 200 hertz there. I kind of just went quickly through 20, 30, 40, 50 because you wouldn't hear much of a difference there. And you can definitely play with this yourself to see how much of a difference you really hear. But you really won't notice anything until you get up to about 200, 300. And generally, I will rarely set this below 200. So you probably want to start really paying attention to somewhere around 200, 300. 300 is usually one of the sweet spots.
Can we forget
230
about
hertz.
the things I
270
said when I
310
was
hertz.
drunk? Can we forget about
305
the
hertz.
things I
300
said
hertz.
when I was drunk?
So right now we have this at 300.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
And like I said, that's generally around where I'd probably start leaving it. As you can tell, it definitely cleaned up a lot of the mud. And if I take this up a little bit more,
Can we
300,
forget
400 hertz,
about the
465,
things I
540
said
hertz.
when I was
620 hertz.
drunk?
you hear as we get up to 600, it really clears it up a lot more. So it really depends on how dense the track you're working on is. If it's really dense, you might want to come even as high as up to 600 or something like that. So a tip for you is, if I remember correctly, the famous Abbey Road studio where the Beatles did a lot of their stuff, I believe their trick for their chambers was 600 hertz and 10K on the high cut. So that's something to try out. But 300 to 600 or somewhere thereabouts is generally the sweet spot to start looking at. All right, so let's take this down a little bit.
600 hertz.
Can we forget about the things I
go back
said
down.
when
300,
I was
300,
drunk?
390 hertz. 300, 290 hertz. 340
Didn't mean to
hertz.
call you
320
that.
hertz. 315 hertz. 305 hertz.
I
300
can't
hertz.
remember what was said or what.
So let's leave that there. I'm going
Out
to
of
start
slider.
interacting.
Low cut order. 6 decibel / October radio button. 12 decibel / October selected radio button.
And if you saw the tutorial I did about EQ and the low cut filters, you saw that the Logic stock EQ has 6 dB, 12 dB, 18 dB, 24 dB. I think it goes up to 48 dB per octave. The Reverb, however, just gives you 6 and 12 dB. So 12 dB per octave means it's going to turn the signal below 300 hertz down by 12 dB for every octave. So at 300 hertz, the next octave down will be 150. Below that will be 75 hertz, and so on and so forth. So every time you hit one of those frequencies, the level gets turned down by another 12 dB. The same for 6 dB per octave. It means everything below 300 hertz gets turned down by 6 dB for each octave. All right, so now we're going to go down and look at the high cut.
Low cut, low shelf, low shelf, low shelf, low shelf, low peak, low peak, low peak, low peak, high peak on / off, high peak fret, high peak gain, high peak Q, high shelf on, high shelf fret, high shelf gain, high shelf, high cut on / off, check box.
All right, so the high cut's already on.
High cut frag, 10,400 hertz slider.
And this is set to 10,400 hertz. And like I said, this is around where I think Abbey Roads and a lot of people usually start out with their high cuts under Reverb, somewhere around 10,000 hertz. So let's go ahead and interact with this and pull this down and see how it sounds.
In 10,400 hertz.
Can we forget about the things I
7,700
said
hertz.
when I was
6,700 hertz.
drunk?
All right, so this is at 6K now.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
Kind of hear that high end starting to clear up a little bit. So once again, we're at 6,000 hertz. So let's keep bringing this down.
Can we
5,800
forget
hertz, 5,000
about
hertz.
the things I said when I
4,350
was
hertz.
drunk? I didn't mean to call you that.
3,750 hertz.
I can't remember what was
3,250
said
hertz.
or what you threw at me.
2,800 hertz.
Can we forget about the
2,450
things I
hertz.
said when I was drunk?
2,100 hertz.
I didn't mean to call you that.
And you see, as we get down to 2,000 hertz, you really start to hear it clear up a lot more.
Can we forget
1,820
about the
hertz.
things I said when I was drunk?
Down at 1,800 hertz, that might have taken a little bit more out of it. So let's bring that up a little bit.
Can we
In slide
forget
1,008,
about
1,008,
the
1,900 hertz.
things I
19,
said
19,
when
2,000
I
hertz.
was
2,000 hertz.
drunk?
All right, so let's hear 2,000 again.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
Somewhere around 2,000, 2,100 hertz is probably a good place. So let's stop
Auto slider.
interacting.
High cut order. 6 decibel / October radio button. 12 decibel / October selected radio button. In. 6 decibel / October radio button.
All right, so now I'm going to play it and I'll switch to 6 dB per octave.
Can we forget about
6
the
decibel /
things I
October.
said when I was drunk?
Let me play that again.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
Let's go back to 12.
12 decibel / October radio button.
So I'll play it and then I'll switch 12 in.
Can we forget about
Selected,
the
12
things I
decibel /
said
October.
when I was drunk?
So I kind of feel like 12 might take a little too much out.
6 decibel / October.
Let's go with
Selected. 6 decibel /
in
October
this
radio button.
particular instance.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
All right, there we go. So that is the 4 parameters you need to pay attention to when looking at reverbs. Your mix between the wet and dry. In the case of ChromaVerb and Space Designer, it's going to be a dry control and a wet control to adjust those levels independently. But some plugins may just have a single mix knob. And as I said earlier, as you go above 50%, you're going to hear more and more reverb. And as you go below 50%, you're going to hear more and more of the dry unaffected signal. Then you're going to have pre-delay and your decay. The pre-delay gives you a little bit of space before the reverb kicks in. And the decay is how long that reverb sticks around for, how long it takes for that reverb to fade out. You have your high cut and low cut filters to help clean up the reverb and give you back some of your clarity. And then you have your reverb type that can be hall, room, chamber, plate, and in some cases spring. Like I said, spring is a lot more common on things like guitar amps, and Space Designer do have some spring reverb options as well. Reverb is one of the few plugins where I will say start with a preset, go through, find a preset you like, and then dial it in and go from there. Now, Space Designer has a lot of the same parameters, and I do have Space Designer set up on a aux track, so I'm going to bypass this.
Auto. Vocals. Toolbar. Bypass. Check. Uncheck. Button. Aux 2. Dialog.
And
Aux 2. Aux 2. Dialog.
now we got Space Designer open. I'm going to VO right.
Toolbar. Button. Bypass. Check. Check. User default. Pop-up button.
Much like before, user default, if it says user default, factory default, manual, any of those things, that is the drop-down menu you can pull up to get to the presets.
Menu. Setting. Undo. Redo. Include. Next. Preview. Copy. Paste. Load. Save. Save as. Save it. Save it. Delete. Large spaces. Submenu.
Large spaces.
Medium spaces. Submenu.
Medium spaces.
Small spaces.
and
Submenu.
small spaces. If you go into any of these,
Small spaces. Submenu. 8 items. Rooms. Submenu.
you see you have rooms,
Halls. Submenu.
halls,
Plate reverbs. Submenu.
plates,
Gated reverbs. Submenu.
gated reverb.
Spring reverbs. Submenu.
We got spring reverbs,
Indoor spaces. Submenu.
indoor spaces, etc. So you can
Indoor
go for
spaces.
these
Submenu.
presets.
41. Closing menu.
As I said before, a convolution reverb is made up of snapshots of different rooms. So usually they will set up a mic in a room to capture the sound of a room, and you can do anything like clap, set off a starter pistol, run some sine waves through a speaker. There are a few different ways you can capture the impulse of the room, but essentially that is how they get the sound of the room that they use to generate the reverb in a convolution reverb. All right, so let's jump over and look at the parameters.
Table. Dry output. Mute slider. 0% slider. Selected. In table. Dry output. Mute slider. 0% slider.
Starting with the dry parameter
Wet output. Minus 10.0 decibel slider. 51.5% slider.
and the wet parameter. So dry is set to mute because, as I said, this is on an aux track, and by default on an aux track, you want to use that send level to do your blend-in. So you only want the wet signal when you have it on the aux track.
Pre-delay. Wet output. Minus 10.0 decibel slider. 51.5% slider.
And you see this is set to minus 10. So if I wanted, I could turn this
In.
up
Wet.
to...
Minus 10.0. In slide. Minus 6. Minus 4. Minus 0.
All right, so now it's at 100% because now it's at 0 dB.
Can we forget about the things I said when I was drunk?
Auto slider.
There's that.
Pre-delay. 8 millisecond slider.
We still
0.8%
have
slider.
our pre-delay, which is set at 8 milliseconds. Unfortunately, the pre-delay sync isn't right next to the pre-delay slider, so we have to VO down arrow through here to find it. It's closer to the bottom by where the high cut and low cut filters are, so it might be quicker to jump to the bottom and VO up arrow to find it. Also, there is no option to sync the decay time here, but you can still set the decay time in milliseconds. There's a lot more parameters, inside of Space Designer than there is in ChromaVerb. It gets really overwhelming. But should you want to go into Space Designer or ChromaVerb in depth, feel free to visit logic.band/training and book yourself some one-on-one time, and we can go deep on these Reverb plugins or anything else having to do with Logic. All right, so that's a brief overview of Space Designer. Like I said earlier, Reverb is one of those things that you usually want to sense more than hear. In most cases, you definitely want to go a little bit more subtle with the Reverb than having it really noticeable. Either that or mess with some delays. If you haven't seen the delay tutorial yet, there'll be a link to that in the description below as well. That's it for this tutorial. Hope you found that useful and helpful. If you got any tips you'd love to share with the community, feel free to leave those in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe both to the YouTube channel and to the email list found at logic.band. That way you can get a free Getting Started with Logic course, and I can keep you up to date on everything going on over at logic.band. If you'd like to help keep bringing tutorials like this to you, then visit logic.band/support to make a one-time or ongoing donation. Also, if you'd love to go deeper on any of these topics, you can visit logic.band/training to book yourself some one-on-one training. Links to all of these, plus supplemental tutorials and blog posts, can be found in the description below. And as always, until next time, happy recording.